I am Lang Smith, founder of Heroes for Life, and I welcome you to this series, PTSD and the First Responder. This is part 2 of the series, and it covers therapy strategies. In this presentation, I will start with a description of what is trauma. I will then talk about prolonged exposure therapy, the original therapy style used when treating PTSD, and actually still used with the military. We will then talk about somatic experiencing and why it is far superior to prolonged exposure therapy. We will talk about bilateral stimulation, such as EMDR, touch therapy, and finally post-traumatic growth. So what is trauma? Trauma is an internal straitjacket created when a devastating moment is frozen in time. Trauma stifles the unfolding of being and strangles our attempts to move forward with our lives. It disconnects us from ourselves, others, nature, and spirit. When overwhelmed by threat, we are frozen in fear, as though our instinctive survival energies were all dressed up with no place to go. Trauma originates as a response in the nervous system and does not originate in an event. Trauma is in the nervous system, not in the event. So what is prolonged exposure therapy? I describe it as like a person who's been walking out of the desert after being in the desert for a week, so thirsty, needing water, and then being told to drink from a fire hose. Sure, it will quench his thirst to some degree, but it may peel off his face in the process. Prolonged exposure therapy is an exposure practice with real-world situations called in vivo exposure. It's talking through trauma, talking about your trauma memory over and over with your therapist. It is called imaginal exposure. Frankly, who wants to sit at the scene of a previous horrific call over and over and over? Let's look at nature's PTSD remedy. Animals in the wild are rarely traumatized, even though they are routinely threatened. Nature has instilled in all animals, including humans, the nervous system capable of restoring equilibrium. The natural immunity to traumatization in the wild is severely undermined when the animal is confined in laboratory conditions. Humans respond to threat more like animals kept in a laboratory condition. When this self-regulating function is blocked or disturbed, trauma symptoms develop as a way of binding the undischarged arousal or activation. So, how should we deal with this bound-up activation? Somatic experiencing, or SE, psychobiological trauma resolution, is a potent method for resolving trauma symptoms and relieving chronic stress. SE is the life's work of Dr. Peter Levine, resulting from his multidisciplinary study of stress physiology, psychology, ethology, biology, neuroscience, indigenous healing practices, and medical biophysics, together with over 45 years of successful clinical application. The SC approach releases traumatic shock, which is key to transforming PTSD and the wounds of emotional and early developmental attachment trauma. SC offers a framework to assess where a person is stuck in the fight, flight, or freeze responses, and provides clinical tools to resolve these fixated physiological states. In a healthy nervous system, there is a normal range where activation and deactivation occurs. At the base of this range is the threshold called parasympathetic stimulation. Parasympathetic stimulation slows heart rate, decreases blood pressure, and increases digestion. At the top of this range is the threshold called sympathetic stimulation. Sympathetic stimulation falls into two categories: fight or flight. The body does all it can to survive. It increases heart rate, increases blood pressure, increases strength, decreases speech, decreases memory. Normally, both the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems work to regulate the body. When we experience something, i.e. an arousal, then our nervous system responds, first activating, then deactivating or settling, and then activating again. All mammals automatically regulate survival responses from the primitive, nonverbal brain, mediated by the autonomic nervous system, or ANS. Under threat, massive amounts of energy are mobilized in readiness for self-defense via the fight, flight, and freeze responses. Once safe, animals spontaneously discharge this excess energy through involuntary movements including shaking, trembling, and deep spontaneous breaths. This discharge process resets the autonomic nervous system, restoring equilibrium. The highest level of response originates in the reptilian brain and is called the freeze response. Freeze is a degree of activation that goes above sympathetic response and is exhibited by the animal freezing or disassociating, i.e. checking out. No animal, not even the human, has conscious control over whether or not it freezes in response to the threat. An experience becomes traumatic when the human organism becomes overwhelmed and reacts with helplessness and paralysis. When there is absolutely nothing you can do to alter the outcome of events, the whole system comes crashing down. The three nervous system responses, fight, flight, and freeze, or tonic immobility, are automatic survival actions. It is important to understand that these limbic system, autonomic nervous system responses are instantaneous, instinctive responses to perceived threat. They are not chosen by thoughtful consideration. They are similar to reflexes in that they are instantaneous, but the mechanisms underlying these responses are much more complex than simple reflexes. First, if the perception in the limbic system is that there is adequate strength, time, and space for flight, then the body breaks into a run. If the limbic perception is that there is not time to flee, but there is adequate strength to defend, then the body will stay and fight. If the limbic system perceives that there is neither time nor strength for fight or flight, and death could be imminent, then the body will freeze. In this frozen state, the victim of trauma enters an altered reality. Time slows down, and there is no fear or pain. In this state, if harm or death do occur, the pain is not felt as intensely. Although humans are similarly designed to rebound from high-intensity survival states, we also have the problematic ability to neocortically override the natural discharge of excess survival energy. Through rationalizations, judgments, shame, enculturation, and fear of our bodily sensations, we may disrupt our innate capacity to self-regulate, functionally recycling disabling terror and helplessness. When the nervous system does not reset after an overwhelming experience, sleep, cardiac, digestion, respiration, and immune system function can be seriously disturbed. With undischarged traumatic stress, a person's nervous system can be stuck on, meaning they have a chronic high sympathetic charge. This leads to anxiety, panic, hyperactivity, exaggerated startle, inability to relax, restlessness, hypervigilance, digestive problems, emotional flooding, chronic pain, sleeplessness, and hostility or rage. A person can also be stuck on-off, meaning they are chronically parasympathetically charged, which leads to depression, flat affect, lethargy, deadness, exhaustion, chronic fatigue, disorientation, disconnection, disassociation, complex syndromes, and poor digestion. SE trauma resolution does not require the traumatized person to retell or relive the traumatic event. Instead, it offers the opportunity to engage, complete, and resolve in a slow and supported way the body's instinctual fight, flight, and freeze responses. Becoming aware of our inner sensations allows us access to the direct experience of our own living body along a scale that ranges from pleasure to pain. These are feelings that originate at the deepest levels of the brainstem rather than the cerebral cortex. Before it is safe to feel the sensations associated with terror and annihilation, you first have to get in touch with what inner strength and healthy aggression feels like. SE facilitates the completion of self-protective motor responses and the release of thwarted survival energy bound in the body, thus addressing the root cause of trauma symptoms. The second modality of therapy that I believe is effective in promoting post-traumatic growth is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. EMDR facilitates the transfer of episodic memories, which includes emotions, physical sensations, and beliefs associated with the traumatic event. EMDR allows for the transfer of memory within the somatic memory networks. It is here that the meaning of the event can be extracted and reprocessed so that the negative associations are no longer present. Just like with SE, EMDR clients need only focus briefly on the disturbing memory during the processing while engaged in the bilateral stimulation as the internal associations are made. The reprocessing is achieved through eye movements, taps, or tones, or a combination of all three. When the information is allowed to process spontaneously, the negative emotions are replaced with more positive ones as the memory takes its proper place in the past. The third modality of treatment I believe is critical to encouraging trauma resolution is touch therapy. Some trauma locked in the body may not be reached by tracking sensations. Touch may be needed to help bring healing more rapidly and at deeper levels than can be accomplished through non-touch methods. Touch therapy is not massage. It is an energy therapy in which practitioners consciously use their hands in a heart-centered and intentional way to support and facilitate physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health. Touch therapy is a biofield therapy that is an energy-based approach to health and healing. One's biofield is the magnetic field around his or her own body. It uses the gift of touch to influence the human energy system, specifically the energy field that surrounds the body, and the energy centers that control the flow from the energy field to the physical body. So, how do we know if what we are doing is working? Post-traumatic growth, or PTG, describes the positive outcomes of trauma resolution. A new reality experienced in the aftermath of trauma determines the degree of post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth is manifested as a greater appreciation for life, more meaningful interpersonal relationships, and an increased sense of personal strength. Openness to religious change facilitated PTG in persons exposed to traumatic events. Focusing on spiritual development seems to be imperative during the treatment process. In conclusion, I want you to really understand that prolonged exposure therapy does not have to mean reliving the event over and over and over. There is a more natural and holistic way. Somatic experiencing offers the opportunity to engage, complete, and resolve in a slow and supported way the body's instinctual fight, flight, and freeze responses. SE facilitates the completion of self-protective motor responses and the release of thwarted survival energy bound in the body, thus addressing the root cause of trauma symptoms. EMDR facilitates the transfer of episodic memory, which includes emotions, physical sensations, and beliefs associated with the original event, into somatic memory networks, in which the meaning of the event has been extracted and negative associations are no longer present. Some trauma locked in the body may not be reached by tracking sensations. Touch may be needed to help bring healing more rapidly and at deeper levels than can be accomplished through non-touch methods. So remember that post-traumatic growth is manifested as a greater appreciation for life, more meaningful interpersonal relationships, and an increased sense of personal strength. I am convinced that the most effective therapy strategy for PTSD encompasses three facets. First, knowledge, learning and understanding what PTSD is and what it is not. Second, involves experience, changing your experience in life through therapy strategies. And finally, spiritual formation. Please take the time to view the third part of this series, Spiritual Formation. I thank you for watching this presentation, and I leave you with the sounds of bilateral music stimulation. I hope you found this information helpful and will welcome your feedback and comments. Please visit my website for additional presentations.